First of all, I'm a Connecticut native. I was born in New Haven, and I actually live right next door in Weston. And I'm not a politician. I've never run for office. I've never sought office. I'm a businessman. And a lot of people have asked me, why are you running for Senate? I mean, why would you want all the aggravation? Why would you want to take a pay cut and go to the Senate? And the reason is, I've been sitting by as a private citizen trying to find ways to help my clients at my brokerage firm protect their wealth from reckless policies coming out of Washington. I predicted a crisis, and I still predict a lot of problems in the future. And so I'm trying to figure out how to protect myself from what these guys are doing. And rather than doing that, I think it's about time I actually got out of the bleachers and went down on the playing field and did something about those policies to try to prevent Washington from repeating those mistakes. I mean, at this point, the government is now growing like a cancer, and it is sucking the lifeblood out of the rest of the economy. I mean, if you want to know why the economy is so weak, it's because the government is so big. The bigger the government gets, the more resources it has to take from the private sector to sustain itself, and we can't survive. If you look at the budget that Barack Obama just proposed for this coming fiscal year, our government is going to spend $3.8 trillion in 1 year. Now, I'm sure they're going to spend more than $4 trillion, but they're at least proposing $3.8 trillion. 10 years ago, they spent half that amount. Now, I remember in 2000, I thought the government was big back then. Now it's twice the size. How can that be? I mean, most Americans actually earn less today than they earned 10 years ago. The stock market is lower than it was 10 years ago. How can the government be twice the size? How can we possibly afford twice as much government as we had 10 years ago? And just recently I looked at these statistics, and I was really shocked when I saw it. I didn't even know it was this bad, to see how much we're paying our government employees. The average federal worker, not counting military, but civilian worker, they earn almost 60% more than the average worker in the private sector. And that's cash. If you count all the lavish pay benefits they have, the pensions and the health care, they actually earn twice as much as what private citizens make. Now, this doesn't make any sense. They're public servants. They work for us. Yet they're making twice as much as we are. Right? I mean, where are we living in the Twilight Zone? I mean, how is that possible? There was a time when civil servants actually made less than people in the private sector. What we've been doing over the last decade or longer is enriching the government at the expense of the private sector. So the first thing that we need to do is dramatically shrink the size of the federal government. We can't think about ways to slow the growth. It's already too big. We can't let it grow. The country can't survive it. So we have to start at the top. We have to cut back on the lavish pay packages of federal employees, our employees, because we're broke. We can't afford to pay them that much money. We need to shrink the head count. We need to abolish entire government departments. There are many departments we don't need. Most of them are not authorized by the Constitution anyway. I mean, one example could be the Department of Energy. The Department of Energy, we didn't even have it until 1979, right? And it came about through Jimmy Carter. So if you like Jimmy Carter, then maybe you like the Department of Energy. But the reason that we established the Department of Energy was because we were going to reduce our dependence on foreign oil. That was the goal. That's why we have it. Well, back when we established it, we imported less than 50% of our oil. Now we import 70% of our oil. So it's been a complete failure. Why is it there? It's spending $30 billion of our tax dollars every year. Let's get rid of it. And there are a lot of other departments we can abolish. We also have to cut the so-called entitlements. First of all, no one is entitled to somebody else's money. We have to understand that. And we have to understand that Ponzi schemes don't work, right? Bernie Madoff is in jail for a reason. He's in jail because the Ponzi schemes don't work. Well, they don't work when the government runs them either. We have a ticking time bomb in Social Security. In fact, as a matter of fact, Social Security right now is actually paying out more in benefits than it collects in taxes. So it's already insolvent on a cash flow basis. It's obviously insolvent when you look at the future contingency liabilities, but it's broke right now because it can't even make its payments without running up the debt. So we have an enormous time bomb that's set to explode. We need to defuse it and defuse it fast. And we can't simply avoid making these hard choices because the politicians don't want to deal with them because they're afraid that if they do, they might not get reelected. We have real problems, and we can't worry about who gets reelected. We need to actually solve them. Because the truth of the matter is, the real economic crisis is not the one that just passed in 2008. It's the one that's coming, right? We have repeated all of the mistakes that created the credit crisis in 2008 that produced the greatest recession since the Great Depression. And I have a very good track record in this respect because nobody in the country was sounding the alarm louder than me about what was going to happen in 2008. I was on national television starting in 2005 all through mid-2008. I was a regular on CNBC, I was on CNN, I was on Fox, I was on Bloomberg, and all I was doing was warning about a coming crisis. I described in detail how the housing bubble was going to implode, how our financial sector was going to crash, how Freddie and Fannie would go bankrupt, how Wall Street firms would fail, and how the government was going to try to bail them out and how that was going to be a mistake. And, nobody believed me. Everybody made fun of me. Everybody laughed at me. I would be on, on panels, and there'd be 4 or 5 guys. Everybody would disagree with me. Sometimes when I would be there to debate somebody, the host, who was a moderator, would interject, and they would debate me too. I was a lone voice warning about the problems. And ultimately, almost all my predictions have now come true. And unfortunately, there's a few more that are still going to come true. But the point is, I understand these problems. And more importantly, I understand the cause. The cause is not the free market. It's not greed on Wall Street. When George Bush made a speech late in his presidency, he said that Wall Street got drunk. Well, yeah, Wall Street was drunk. Main Street was drunk. The entire country was drunk. That's not the question. The question is, why? Where'd they get all the alcohol? They got it from the government. They got it from the Federal Reserve. I understood how monetary policy was distorting market forces, how government regulations and fiscal policy was distorting the economy, was creating the moral hazards, led to conditions of wild and rampant speculation on Wall Street and excessive consumption on Main Street. It was government interference with the market that caused the problem. Not a lack of regulation, but an excess of regulation. And so I want to go to Washington and change that before they do any more damage. You see, when they talk about stimulating the economy, they're not stimulating the economy. They're stimulating the problems in the economy. They're stimulating the government. They're actually sedating the economy. The more they stimulate the economy, the weaker the economy is going to get. The more bills that they have to create jobs, the more jobs they're going to destroy. See, we don't create jobs by passing legislation, right? We create jobs through profits, through capital. But unfortunately, the government is waging war on these things, and we're losing our jobs. You see, we stimulate our way into this crisis. When the NASDAQ bubble burst back in 2002, and when I first got my start in this business, it was warning about the NASDAQ bubble. I've been working in the investment business pretty much my whole life, but I worked for some major firms before I started my own company. I got hired by a firm called Drexel Burnham, and a week before I started my job, they went out of business. And then I worked for another company, Lehman Brothers, and they went bankrupt last year. But I worked there long enough to know I didn't like it, and I started my own business. I didn't think retail investors were getting a fair shake, so I wanted to give out good advice, not the advice that my firm wanted me to give out. So I started my own business, and I was working out of my one-bedroom apartment in downtown Los Angeles. But one of the earliest things I did as a stockbroker, cold calling individual investors, was warning them about a stock market bubble, about a bubble in the NASDAQ and a bubble in the internet. And I knew that was going to collapse and it was going to wipe out a lot of people. And it was difficult because when I was cold calling people, no one wanted to hear that. Everybody wanted to hear about the next internet stock that would make them rich.